Mr. Goellner, could you state your full name for me, please?
My name is William C. Goellner, sometimes Clarence William Goellner, and most of the time I go by Bill.
Okay. Okay, could you state your name for me again, please, Mr. Goellner?
Bill Goellner.
Okay. And how long has your family been here in the St. Charles County area?
Since the early 1980s. No, not 1980s, 1880s. So that's more realistic.
Okay. That's a long time.
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell me, when did you first meet Edna?
Edna, in 1956 or so, I was writing a column for the Banner News called Youth Speaks Up. And I was also starting high school then and editing the Duchenne Leaves, which was the high school newspaper. And I don't know who it was, but I believe it was the teacher in high school who said, "You need to visit Mrs. Olson and get to know her if you ever expect to be some kind of a writer." My dad wrote a column in the Banner News. My uncle wrote for the St. Louis Review, the Catholic Archdiocesan paper. And I guess I just had a bug other than being a printer. And I went to meet Edna, and she was like a grandmother to me. That was my first impression when I walked in and we introduced ourselves, and I looked around her place, and it was archives. If there's ever archives, Edna had the archives. And that's how we got started together, and I visited her place quite often and learned how to write a little bit, and the bug got me about history. So that's your first question.
Okay. You said that you visited her home and what you call her archives. Were there other people that would come to see Edna?
A lot of people did. It was just a accident when we would be there at the same time, but she didn't mind at all. It was just people were suggesting to people that if they wanted to know anything about their families or anything about the buildings that maybe their ancestry owned at one point in time, it was word of mouth. People would find out that Edna had these things, and they would call her and ask her if they could come by. And they did.
What interested you most about Edna?
She was just a character. Very, very intelligent. You know, I don't personally know her history before the time that I went there. I'm sure that her ancestors and family have that data. But comparing her to my grandmother is about the strongest thing I can say about what impressed me. Because my grandmother had 13 children, and she was a heck of a person.
Prior to the 1960s and during the 1960s, what was the condition of South Main?
It was really bad. The buildings were decaying. There were things like lumber yard that ran through the area, some oil tanks, used car lot, billboards where buildings hadn't been built and they were used for different purposes because nobody in St. Charles hardly understood the gem that we had here. And different things like what I just mentioned would appear, and nobody was worried about it. And big changes.
So you're saying that Edna cared about not only the looks of the buildings, but the history of the buildings?
Oh yes, of course, yes. That was her great contribution, was the history of the area.
Okay. How do you think the work of Edna, how did it impact change in the historical area?
That is really the story of her and my relationship and the things that have historically changed since that early time. And that takes me into the answer to your question. In 1956, because of all the archives she had, there were a number of people in this city who really thought something should be done. And they formed the Historical Society in '56. And she was a charter member. A few years later, the Historical Society bought Eckert's Tavern, which is here on South Main, and it was made their headquarters, and some of the archives were moved there and some stayed in Edna's house because the Eckert's Tavern was too small to handle it all. But that was the big first step. Her archives were the stimulant that led to this. And like I said, people that wanted to know about buildings or families, they could go to see her. In 1967, well, I back up 1 year. In 1966, where we were, the city council, pretty well controls everything, the mayor and the city council. And they realized in '66 that, and kind of caught the bug, that they needed to do something to maintain this place, or to help it. And they created a landmarks board in '66, which was supposed to try to help preserve things, and if something needed to be rehabbed, they had the voice of telling the people whether they could do something, they couldn't do something. And that went on for quite a while. In 1959, and I'm getting this stuff a little out of order here,
Okay.
is when Edna started writing for the St. Charles Journal. And she did that till 1969. And her stories were, the greatest word to use to describe them was embellished. She just knew what would help the street recover and become famous. It's sort of like any old city you go to that has ghost tours. Edna embellished her stories a little bit so that if anybody ever wanted to start a ghost tour, we just had ghost tours in every other building. And that created another interest by all of the people in St. Charles, not just the ones that loved history. And that was about that time, 1967, she decided to write a book about all the buildings on the street. She dedicated it to her mother, Mary Johnson McElhiney, and it's quite a piece. Really stirred a lot of memories and brought the history of where buildings were torn down that shouldn't have been torn down because somebody wanted to build another used car lot. Very sad. But when she wrote that in 1967, we were right in the middle of getting ready to celebrate the bicentennial of St. Charles. And in '69, this book was published, and it is the bicentennial, 1769 to 1969. So that's from when the founders, the Frenchmen, landed on the Missouri River here in St. Charles. They talked about what kind of town this was. It wasn't, a town is not a good word, village maybe. And when Lewis and Clark arrived here, they had things to say about this town. And here's a picture right here of Edna, and she was the archivist who advised in 1969 how to compute this book. Unfortunately, right in the middle of the celebrations, there was a major parade with all kind of floats and old-fashioned cars and stuff like that. And the first day of the parade, she didn't feel well, and she was taken to the hospital for treatment, and she died the next day. Now, that's only 1969. 31, 41, 45 years ago. In 71, and we're still on what did she influence? What happened? In 71, 2 years after she died, the federal government made available loans to, or not loans, but urban renewal money for different cities to improve them, which was a big step by the city council. They debated it quite a while, and it was never a unanimous vote to bring urban renewal to St. Charles, but it came. And they did many wonderful things that Edna would have loved. Built a riverside park called Frontier Park, built a nice long drive along the river called Riverside Drive, and tore up the whole street of South Main. It had been patches of concrete, patches of bricks, patches of asphalt. All the bricks came up and everything was made the way it should have been. Also the sidewalks, which were hodgepodge here and there, although a few of them were the original bricks that were put there 100 years earlier. So that was going very, very well. There came a time, though, right around that time, that different factions that were interested in South Main couldn't agree on how it should be. And the idea was to preserve what was here so it could get better and better. And our historic district had some folks who didn't like the embellishments that she did in her writing or some of the ideas she had for the city. And things started happening that were kind of controversial. This one here was written in 1998, and it was about what the placard should say on the buildings. Should they say anything that is legend handed down through Edna's time? And we're sitting here today in a building where Elijah Lovejoy was attacked. He escaped St. Charles and went to Alton, Illinois, and he was killed there and became the first martyr of the free press in the United States because he was an absolutionist. And the kind of things that were put in here were one faction saying what they want for this street. Well, there's a sign out in front, propagated by Edna. I have a granddaughter named Emma. About Lovejoy and his ultimate death. So they found this lady to write things about the buildings. And this building, remember, this was Lovejoy's. He didn't live here, but he was here. And this is what it says. Anthony Palmer built a new brick house here in 1819. The following year, the property was sold to Urien Devore. 1 year later, it was sold again in 1822. It was sold to Seth Millington. Millington Heirs sold it to Melchior Thoreau for $700. The building front was changed in 1900 using cast iron from the Banner Iron Works. This whole book is full of those kind of things that are attempts to take away what made it famous, what made Emma successful. So this was the kind of thing that I and many others thought was the wrong way to handle it. At the same time, this book, which I held up earlier, that Edna wrote and dedicated it to her mother in 1967, it was reprinted in 1998. And on this page right here, the editor started picking away at Edna and the things that she wrote and took pictures of in this book. And recently, if you consider 2008 recently, it was edited again. And again, different things were changed. This goes along with this thing of changing the idea of what the plaques should say. But in 1997, to better understand what this district meant, the city gave up on their old landmarks board that was founded in '66. And in 1997, now we're getting close, the city of St. Charles hired a firm to write guidelines for this district. And those guidelines ended up being a book about that thick. And it talked about you had to use wood on windows instead of vinyl. And you couldn't do this, or you couldn't do that, or you can do this. And a board was created to oversee those guidelines. And instead of being called the Landmarks Board, this is a toughie, and I was on the board for a while. The Historic Land Clearance Preservation and Architectural Review Board. Because of that long name, it was called HLPARB. And then as a few more years passed, people just start calling it the Landmarks Board. But with that guidebook, you get to the point where you feel that it settled great success and Edna's dreams. They became reality. Her dreams were now reality, and they're still being enforced by the same a board that has to approve or disapprove, like I said earlier. And sitting here this morning, something occurred to me, and I kind of rewrote it. But this is about as far as I can go in admiring this lady and knowing that the city now calls this a pearl. There wouldn't be a pearl if it hadn't been for her. But as President Adams said on the day that both he and Thomas Jefferson died, pause.
That's just fine.
I wish I would put more space between words and run together.
There are times I do too.
As President Adams said, on the day that he and Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, both died, Adams sent a messenger to Jefferson's house. Both men were on their deathbeds, but they had become close friends. And Adams sent a horseback rider to Jefferson's house because he knew he was dying. And they died within 5 hours of each other. But the man who was riding the horse to Jefferson's house didn't get there in time. And Adams said to himself, Jefferson survives. Edna survives. Amen.
What a nice tribute.
It's a I went on Google. I missed something here. It was July the 4th of 1826.
July the 4th of 1826 that they
Both died.
both died.
Both
Oh my
died on the
gosh.
same day, within 5 hours of each other. It was also the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Wow.
They both wanted to live till that day. I stood in front of Thomas Jefferson's home, and you could see Adams' house across the Potomac. And the door was real low. Adams had to lean over to get out of the front door. And Jefferson said that was because I wanted him to bow to me every time he came out. Those are legends that created a tremendous historical district in that county.
Yes.
And I told that better than I did this part here. But I didn't get to the part about the,
About the what?
well, about in being the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
Okay, yes.
But this was enough.
That's okay, I can clip it in. See, I already got it in here.
Did you record that one
It's
too?
recorded, so I'll just
Both
clip
of
it
them
back.
both of them are in there. The one with the independence and
Yep,
good.
yeah, so,
Because it's still right here on my screen. No, it's on hold.
well.
I went to lunch and I came back and I went to Google.
Oh,
And
really quick.
And I typed in, tell me about blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
And man, it came across big time.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you again for the second time. I want to thank you for.
You did get both of those?
Oh, yeah.
The one I read off of here and the one that I
Yes.
told this to? Okay.
Yes, both of them. So, thank you so very much.
You're very welcome, and we'll see each other in March or April,
Oh, great, yes, 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 yes.
probably April.